of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on their table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Only use the black approved earpiece. Keep your earpieces away from the microphones at all times. And when you are not using your earpiece, place it face down on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I'd like to inform all the members that all witnesses have, thanks to the clerk, completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 29th, 2024, the committee will commence its study of the appointment of Carolyn Bennett as Canada's ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark. So, Dr. Bennett, Your Excellency, welcome. It's great to have you back here. Thank you for having made it possible. I understand you do have another commitment. You were very firm on trying to get out of here by 5:45, but you graciously agreed to stay till 5 minutes to 6. Am I correct?
Yes, I think because it is Denmark's Constitution Day, and I am supposed to be at the farewell party to the Danish ambassador. We're trying to get there before the remarks, and because Minister Joly will be speaking.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
We'll try and get a cab for anybody who wants to come with us. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for that. So you will be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And if it's okay with everyone, given the time constraints, maybe we should do one round per party? Yeah? Is that agreeable to everyone? Excellent. Okay. Well, Madam Ambassador, welcome. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
To appear before the committee here on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin people, especially today on the celebration of Constitution Day in Denmark. I'm pleased to be here to answer any of your questions, and I'm joined by Robert Sinclair, Director General for Europe, Eurasia, and the Arctic, and the Senior Arctic Official for Canada. I have to say I was truly honored when the Prime Minister Trudeau appointed me Ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark in January, but especially humbled as I presented my credentials to His Majesty King Frederick X in Copenhagen on May 24th. Representing Canada at this time in history is especially crucial, and I will do everything I can to advance Canada's foreign policy priorities with the Kingdom of Denmark and our focus on Arctic issues. Canada highly values its long-standing friendship and effective cooperation with the Kingdom of Denmark, which, as you know, comprises Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. More than 196,000 people in Canada claim Danish origins, and the Inuit in Canada and Greenland also have a shared history, culture, similar language, including family ties going back generations. We have closely collaborated with Denmark and other like-minded nations in support of Ukraine's defense, recovery, and reconstruction, and Denmark has joined the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children, the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge, and the NATO Climate and Security Center of Excellence. It has been 2 years since Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark signed the boundary agreement resolving the 50-year-old dispute over Lincoln Sea and Hans Island, Tartupaluk, and establishing a boundary on the continental shelf in the Labrador Sea. I know that important work is being done to realize the promise achievements of this agreement, including the issue of Inuit mobility. The manner in which we resolve that dispute speaks to our shared commitment to the rule of law and the rules-based international order, as well as meaningful engagement with Inuit. The Arctic represents a strategic and particularly compelling area of collaboration between Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark. In October of last year, a letter of intent for cooperation on Pikial Sorsuaq was signed by Canada and Greenland on the margins of the Arctic Circle Assembly in Iceland. This is an important step towards ensuring responsible management of one of the most biologically productive regions north of the Arctic Circle. Like Canada, the Kingdom of Denmark is firmly committed to the enduring value of the Arctic Council, and particularly as Denmark and the Kingdom of Denmark is preparing to take over the chairship of the Council in 2025. In February, Greenland released its Foreign Affairs, Defence and Security Policy, Nothing About Us Without Us, with Chapter 6 focused squarely on Canada, its closest neighbour. Le Canada, le Danemark sont de solides alliés de...
Canada and Denmark are solid allies within NATO and active participants in alliance operations. The Canadian Armed Forces Joint Task Force North works closely with the Danish Armed Forces' Arctic Joint Command in Greenland. Denmark is a prosperous trading nation. It is a strong supporter of CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union, which was ratified in June 2017. Bilateral trade has increased by over 30% since the entry into force of CETA. Starting in June 2024, Canadian North and Air Greenland teamed up to offer a new seasonal service between the Iqaluit and Nuuk. Denmark has set some of the world's most ambitious climate change targets. This has created business opportunities for Canadian companies and for multilateral cooperation.
From an enhanced relationship with the Kingdom of Denmark. And it is my role to ensure that those gains are realized. I will continue doing that job to the best of my abilities. Merci, thank you, tak, kuyanak.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. We will now open it up to questions from the members. Each member will have 6 minutes. But I must forewarn you all that when we hit the 6 minutes, I'm going to have to cut it off, given the time constraints. And we will start off with MP Hoback. You have 6 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And I just want to make sure the mic's working here because these are new to us here. Yeah, it sounds like it. Ambassador, first of all, I want to congratulate you on your role and wish you all the best in your new role and want to thank you for your service as a minister and a member of Parliament. I had the pleasure of being in your riding, door knocking for the Conservative member, future Conservative member a couple weeks ago, but we'll see what happens there. I just wanted to ask you about, as you get settled into this new role, what is the skill sets you're going to be taking from your previous job that you can actually bring into this new job? And where do you see that benefiting Canada at the end of the day?
Thank you for the question, Randy. I joined the Arctic Caucus in 1998 when Nancy Karatek and I were elected at the same time, and I've been part of that traveling north every summer since then. I became the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs in 2015. That continued my interest in the North, but also in terms of the relationships with northern countries and Nordic countries, from Barrow, Alaska, to the Arctic Circle meetings in Iceland. And I also think that the relationship of recognition of rights, respect, cooperative partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, that's been very much part of my wanting to be able to make sure people have been heard, and that's how you get things done.
Running out of time, so I'll be very quickly. If you had one thing when you're done your role as an ambassador, what would it be in regards to advancing the relationship with Canada and Denmark? What would be one thing you'd say that I'd like to see get across the finish line before I leave?
I think it's formalizing the relationship with Greenland in that with the new flights, with the ability with their new policies. I think that we know that they do see us as their closest neighbor, and from telehealth to critical minerals to all of the things that we can benefit as a country by working closely with Greenland and within the Kingdom of Denmark, who are very, very supportive of this, particularly as Denmark comes to chair the Arctic Council. The role of Greenland and their voice will become increasingly important.
And then just quickly, when it comes to NATO and the role Denmark has in NATO and Canada, NATO in the Arctic, and how NATO, where do you see Canada and Denmark? Do you see more joint operations in the Arctic? Do you see some things like that possibly?
Absolutely. When we were in Nuuk 2 weeks ago and we met with the Joint Arctic Command and Major General Sorensen, that it was very important to see the joint exercises that are taking place, but also a real understanding of security and again, how the people who live in the North need a say in what happens in the North. And I think that NORAD's been very, very important, and our partnership with Denmark there.
Okay, Chair, I'll turn the rest of my time over to Mr. Ingenious.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. I do have a few questions about your new role, just based on your track record and how that history could impact your work. According to an order paper question, when you were Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, you personally met 4 times in 2 years with a company called Fair Price Pharma. Fair Price Pharma is run by Dr. Perry Kendall, until very briefly a BC Public Health officer, and their business is heroin. It seems very unusual that a sitting minister would meet 4 times with a company selling heroin, and I do wonder how this could impact your new role. So I have a couple questions for you along those lines. Have you had any interactions with Fair Price Pharma since you became ambassador?
I really draw the Chair's attention to the concept of relevance. This meeting is very specifically with respect to the work of the ambassador with respect to representing Canada in Greenland, and one can try to draw some relationship between a previous life and that work. They have done this before, but I would say this is not relevant to the questions that we need to be asking the ambassador with respect to her work, and so I would ask you to ask the member to move on.
Yeah, just on that point, I didn't even have a chance to ask the question, and it's about credibility in the current role. So
Okay, but if you could establish some relevance, that would be great, Mr.
yeah,
Jones.
and just for the record, I have 2 minutes and 8 seconds left.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I'll restart the clock there. Have you had any interactions with Fair Price Pharma since you became ambassador?
No.
Okay. Have you been on any meetings, any calls, CC'd on any correspondence with Fair Price Pharma since you left your position as minister?
Not that I'm aware of. I know Dr. Kendall and I go back a long time, from the time that I was Minister of Public Health, and he has been a leader in setting up the Public Health Network, and I very much respect the work that he's done. I think Dr. Fry knows really a lot, probably more than I do, about the work that they have been doing, but it is it really, I don't think is relevant to my job now.
Well, I appreciate that you have high regard for him. He is someone who has transitioned from the public health world fairly quickly into a company that sells heroin. And why did you meet 4 times in 2 years with him as minister?
I think
I think
that's
it speaks to
already.
credibility.
Yeah, I don't.
Point of
I
order,
think that is.
point of order, Chair. Relevance?
Yes,
Please.
Dr. Fry.
Just on that point, I think it does speak to credibility. I think these are questions that the minister may be asked. She may be asked internationally. And look, she's had those 4 meetings. I would just, out of respect for the minister, I'll give her the balance of my time to answer the question. That's my last question. Why did she meet 4 times with them in 2 years? And if the committee will allow, I'll give her the balance of my time to simply explain what was discussed in those 4 meetings that she attended in person with this company. So I hope members will provide the minister with that courtesy.
It wasn't established how this is rationally connected to the study.
We'll allow the ambassador to respond.
Thank you, Chair.
You have 35 seconds.
Thank you.
I actually don't think it's relevant to my job now, although I think the drug monitoring part of coming out of Lisbon in terms of the future of whether it's fentanyl precursors, there's many things international countries are looking to help with, but I really don't think.
But just
meeting
why
with
did you
that
take those
company
4
has-
meetings?
Mr. Jennings, she's still responding.
Point of order, as Mr. Chair, the member said he'd give the balance of time.
Yeah, I'm just repeating the question because I don't, maybe it wasn't heard or
Mr.
understood.
Jennings, if you could allow her to respond, as you initially indicated. There's another 10 seconds, Madam Ambassador.
Yeah, I actually don't think the question's relevant to my job.
Completely understand.
Well, you had a chance to answer, and you didn't.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. So now we go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 6 minutes.
Chair, welcome, Excellency. I think that we share a lot with Denmark, so it's interesting to see you taking this position. Denmark belongs, as you well know, as a co-founder of NATO with Canada. Also, Denmark is in the OSCE, and Denmark is as committed as Canada is to Ukraine and to helping Ukraine to win that war against Russia. That's the first part of my statement, and it's leading to the question I'm going to ask you. The second part is that Denmark has managed to be able to look with Canada towards the security of the Arctic. With Russia amassing massive military ships in the Arctic, I think we all need to be concerned about security in the Arctic. So I wanted to ask you, have you been discussing this with Denmark? Is there a way in which Canada and Denmark can work closer together with regard to Ukraine and with regard to Arctic security?
Absolutely, and I think we learned a lot in the meeting when we were in Nuuk with Major General Sorensen on the kind of exercises that we're taking together, but again, that plan. And I think as you know, the Arctic policy and Northern Policy Framework really articulated, but I think you're quite right, Hetty, that since the illegal invasion of Russia to Ukraine, all of the Nordics are very much focused on what we can do together on security and particularly in the Arctic. And I think even being in the Faroe Islands last week, knowing really how the Americans want to help everybody is worried. And I guess I was just going to, you know, placing those wreaths after on the anniversary of the liberation of Denmark, that Canada was very much part of that, and the U.S. and U.K. and Poland, that you know, this is a country that has been occupied, and I think that their focus on Ukraine and helping Ukraine and being able to give everything they can to really support Ukraine and its reconstruction. It was also interesting, Hetty, you would be interested that when I was at the WHO Europe, which again when we're the multilaterals that are in our area in Copenhagen, that the WHO Europe is actually dealing with the Canadian funding for the mental health support in Ukraine. So there's lots of connection there. Yeah.
I think I noticed that Denmark just raised its carbon pricing. It's got one of the highest carbon prices in the world, in Europe, and it is actually looking very clearly to the melting of ice in the Arctic, what's going to happen to the Arctic, how it's going to affect their infrastructure and their agriculture and everything they do because of the melting of ice in the Arctic. Has that been discussed, how we can cooperate environmentally?
Yes, and I think that there's many Canadian municipalities that come to Copenhagen to actually learn how you can mitigate and how citizens can and municipalities can be part of actually all of the tools that need to be there in order to combat climate change and mitigate. It's interesting that even Copenhagen is planning to build an island that will protect really the harbor and all of the canals in terms of just knowing and preparing for you know what we all hope won't happen in terms of the rising sea levels.
You mean an artificial island?
Yeah.
Really? That's interesting engineering feat.
Yeah.
So you think we can work together and learn something from Denmark? Because they've been leaders in dealing with environmental problems and issues.
It is part of their identity now, and
Yeah.
I think that particularly when it comes to whether it's 9 out of 10 have a bicycle, I mean, being able to get people out of their cars, being able to use some of the things like wind power as opposed to diesel. It was interesting that the port on the most western part of Denmark was a fishing community, then an oil drilling community, now doing windmills. Like that in terms of just transition, we have a lot to learn, I think, from Denmark, as well as, frankly, childcare, free post-secondary education, a very generous welfare system that has the crime rate down. It is and of course the approach of hygge, of just people wanting to live a good life and everybody being sort of equal stature. It's a really interesting culture.
Well, how am I doing for time, Chair?
You have 24 seconds.
24 seconds.
can
If
give-
there's anything you wanted to say to us here in this committee about how we can look forward to our foreign affairs relationships with Denmark and enhance it, what would you say?
I think as we look to their chairmanship of the Arctic Council, I think that we want to be able to support them. And we want them also to understand that in that kingdom, that Greenland, the Faroe Islands, as well as Denmark are separate countries that are in the kingdom and in the realm. And I think we will see a need to support that as they come to the chairmanship of the Arctic Council, that the leadership of Greenland in speaking for Greenlanders and the people living in the north, that we have an opportunity as Canada to say that the Arctic policy needs to still have the leadership of Arctic states, and that we, as an Arctic country, need to support them in that vision, as opposed to the people who seem to think the Arctic is a public good. And I think that this is not Antarctica. This is a north where people live there and they need to have a say.
Thank you,
Thank
Lloyd
you.
Axworthy, for starting the Arctic Council. Thank you.
Thank you. We next go to MP Bergeron. MP Bergeron, you have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I hope that I will have a generous 6 minutes, like Madam Fry had. Thank you, Your Excellency, for being here with us today, and thank you for giving us more than the hour that you agreed to at the beginning. It's very much appreciated. You no doubt know that in this committee, we spent a few weeks hearing testimony on Canadian diplomacy. One of the points that arose quite frequently was the issue of limiting political nominations or appointments. Once upon a time, prime ministers would appoint people to the Senate to reward them for the services done. But we have seen a new tendency on the part of the Prime Minister, and that is to have former MPs who are appointed as ambassadors. We have Bob Rae at the UN and other examples. And there's also the ambassador to France that was offered to Marc Garneau, and to Spain for Mr. Lametti. And you have been offered the position of ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark. You are replacing Mr. Denis Robert, who was there from 2020 to 2024, and he was a career diplomat. It was in 1999 that he became a public servant, and from 2012 to 2016 he was in Belgium doing his diplomatic service. So I do have high regard for what you were able to do during your long and prolific career as a family doctor, but also as a parliamentarian. However, In addition to the duties that you carried out with First Nations, what in your past has prepared you for this position as the Ambassador of Canada to the Kingdom of Denmark? I think that those are essentially the same questions as those asked by Mr. Hoback. I think it has to do with wisdom and understanding of Arctic issues and cooperation between our countries. It is very important to the Prime Minister, or for the Prime Minister, to have the power to appoint people like Tom Clark and John Horgan. It's not just former MPs who are appointed.
Of how the variety and diversity of the public service and the foreign service has been very helpful, I think, over the years to just bring different perspectives into what is an ascension through the ranks, and that maybe I shouldn't say refreshing breeze, but maybe I am trying to do my best to bring what I have learned, particularly, on the panel in Greenland, where it was about engagement with citizens, that they asked me to present on what meaningful engagement with Indigenous people means. And as you've heard me say before, Stefan, it shouldn't be scary. And I think that we have a role to play as Canada to really move forward on the issues of reconciliation, as Willie Littlechild says, reconciliation, and I really look forward to that, and also, of course, the relationship between the Inuit and the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, and that relationship. So I'm very much enjoying this role, and the fact that I am surrounded by career public servants who really are fantastic, and I think over my time, even as a doctor, as you say, you know what you know what you don't know, you know who and when to go for help, and that's, I think, the approach that I'm taking to this new job.
Un des arguments qui avait été avancé par certains des témoins.
One of the arguments that was upheld by some of the witnesses that were talking about limiting the number of political appointments was that it could be demotivating for people who are career diplomats or try to be career diplomats, and then when they're about to be appointed, then it goes to somebody else. What do you think of that answer? I did not hear any of those feelings expressed.
What it feels like.
Very briefly, we're 10 seconds.
So I hope my mic works. Monsieur Bergeron, je dirais que chaque personne.
Mr. Bergeron, I would say that people who become heads of mission have their own background, experience, etc. We are motivated by leaders.
If you could really wrap it up in 10 seconds, please.
I am very happy and eager to work with Ambassador Bennett.
Thank you very much, Mr. St. Clair. Thank you for that. We next go to MP Zarrillo. MP Zarrillo, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to say congratulations to Ambassador Bennett. I know many years ago when I was at the United Nations at the Status of Women Commission, they said that only 19% of diplomats across the world were women. I think that's raised to about 20.5 right now. And we know that Canada is a much higher percent, 35 or more. So I just want to congratulate you on that, especially at this time where we see so much unrest across the globe, and we know that we need more women at the peacekeeping table. So I just wanted to say congratulations on behalf of the NDP. You mentioned some comments around reconciliation. And so my question is just, what role does the Canada Embassy in Denmark play in respecting and advancing reconciliation in Nunavut, Quebec, and Newfoundland and Labrador? How do you see that?
Thanks for that. And we're at 50% women ambassadors, actually, so, or heads of mission. So we're pretty excited by that. I think what we've been trying to do in Denmark, and we have set up 4 meetings on Arctic perspectives. At that time, we were pleased at the one that we held last month that Natan Obed was one of the panelists, as well as Cynthia Wesley-Eskimo, who chairs the National Center on Truth and Reconciliation, as has the chair in reconciliation at Lakehead University. And they were very, very well received. And I think that this, again, becomes very important as Canada sort of is able to set an example, and actually for us to particularly focus on the relationship of Inuit, on Inuit mobility, that hopefully with the new flight that will go from Nuuk to Iqaluit and then down and then hopefully over to northern Quebec in Kuujjuaq, that there's I think a real example of nothing about us without us, and being able to show that that this is something that we know we're nowhere there, that it's a journey, not a destination, but that it's not scary, and that these relationships are ones in which we learn a great deal. I know that with the Arctic Parliamentary meeting recently in the Nordics, that your colleague Laurie Eidlot was a bit worried about the way things were being framed in terms of Indigenous rights. And so I think that we all as parliamentarians need to come together to work with that kind of reconciliation across the world, but also knowing that those Indigenous people that you have identified in Canada, actually having them working sort of their nation to nation is going to be hugely important as we put forward their voices.
Thank you, Ambassador. And also that goes to my next question, which is how are Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark working together alongside Indigenous people in regards to economic bilateral cooperation and to respect Indigenous rights and way of life? And I'll just add to that, because you just mentioned about the flights. You might know that my colleague Laurie Eidlot was up today talking about the exorbitant price of flights and how it really is restrictive. It's not economic equality, and it really isn't allowing for the free movement of people, not goods, but definitely not people at that price. Maybe you could share some thoughts on that.
No, I think we all have a concern about the flights that at the moment, because of the costs, that there'd be certain people that it would be easier to go back to Copenhagen and come back than actually deal with these new routes, and we've got to deal with that. I think we can deal with it also in ways of supporting, whether it's sports teams or music groups or the kind of youth exchange that actually is, there is an agreement between Denmark and Canada. So in terms of youth mobility, so how do we buttress the success of these flights, and then how do we work together to get those prices down?
And Ambassador, I would just ask you to stay close to MP Eidlot and have some conversations with her as soon as possible, if you can, on that, because this is so important that we have free movement of people and goods, and that Indigenous people have their rights respected and their economic independence.
Yes, that was one of the first calls I made. In terms of before I presented my credentials, I spoke to some of the northern senators, obviously premiers, as well as the head of the National Indigenous Organization like Natan, and so we want to know what their view is on Inuit mobility, and that really important thing. Lori talked to me about, her constituents in Pond Inlet who have relatives across in Greenland, and how do we get them to move back and forth, even before their travel documents or some of the, and so I think what Natan had said, that how do we just have a placekeeper to make sure that we honor this commitment we've made on Inuit mobility, and can't prescribe what Greenland does about their definition of the people who would qualify, as opposed to us here in Canada who have those kinds of formal registries. So it's a challenge, and I think that we know we can just do it by listening to the people affected by the policies, which is
Great.
the
And
only
I'll
way
just
you
raise
get
the
good
voice
policy.
of MP Idlout and her constituents to say that having ability to get passports quickly, if you can assist with that, even in regards to Greenland, that's very important to her residents, and
Thank
certainly an
you.
issue she's brought to the House.
We're now 30 seconds over. So allow me to conclude the questions by thanking you, Madam Ambassador, for your lengthy service of lengthy years of public service. And I know I speak on behalf of all the members here when I wish you continued success in the years ahead representing our country. Thank you for
And
that.
come and visit.
So we'll just, given the time constraints, we will just suspend for literally 2-3 minutes. No more. pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by committee on Thursday, February 16th, 2023, the committee will resume its study of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the current situation in Iran. Right now, I'd like to welcome our three distinguished witnesses. We have here in person Professor Nomani Rabudi from the University of Ottawa. We also have Mr. Shahram Kholdi from Kayaksor Inc., who is a Middle East specialist here in person. And virtually, we have joining us from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Mr. Behnam Taliblu, who is a senior fellow. So we will start off with Professor Rabudi. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. After we've heard from all three of the witnesses, again, because of time constraints, there will be 5 minutes of rounds of questioning of 5 minutes only, so we can approximately get out of here by 6:35. Professor Rabudi, apologies for that. You have 5 minutes, and once you're very, very close to it, I'll hold this up, so you know you should be putting an end to it within 10 to 15 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you.
Et merci beaucoup, et merci pour...
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I would just like to start by a short introduction, because when I talk about the Middle East, as you know, that issues linked to the Middle East are often polemical. And I want to be sure to give you the right image here. I must say that I have absolutely no sympathy for the Iranian regime, and much less for the Revolutionary Guard Corps and violence linked to it. Some things, though, that I will say will go against the grain. And it is in the interest of Canada that I would like to speak or express my point of view. And I am here as a professor, so I would imagine that this committee will be benefiting from my expertise, if you will. So the first thing that should be said, and really 5 minutes is not enough to cover everything, but I will talk about the issue of making the IRGC part of the list of terrorist entities. In the current circumstances, it is not a very good idea, and I will explain why. The first thing that has to be done is to look at this outside of all ideological lenses, because we have the proof over the last last 30 years that when foreign policy is based on predetermined ideologies that are disconnected from the international context, it's not a good idea, particularly in the Middle East. That context is a challenge to that approach and contradicts it. And we must make sure that we avoid to do that. So we have to learn from history and to avoid committing the mistakes of the past. The IRGC is definitely one of the destabilizing influences in the Middle East, but it is only one of many that are just as dangerous. So selectively focusing on it will go against the interest, I think, of Canada and against Canada's image in the Middle East. It will also prevent Canada from playing a mediation role in the region. And that is in the context of the complete failure of American policies that has been confirmed by experts in the region, including American experts. So there has to be a risk-based approach, and it is important to really make sure that we don't make steps that could be dangerous to us and go against our interests by trying to align Canada's policies in the Middle East with U.S. policies. That would be an ideological position that is not strategic and that has presents true dangers for our interests in the world and our own national security. We must avoid taking part in deeply rooted identity-based conflicts in contexts that are rife with difficulties linked to colonialism, religion, and political agendas that are not our own. It is important to try to take a balanced position with regard to the situation in the Middle East, rather than intervening uselessly in those conflicts. Well, we mustn't do that, and we must also avoid bringing aspects of those conflicts home. The terrible tragedy in Gaza right now is a confirmation that the Canadian society is particularly and deeply divided on Middle East issues. Governments often adopt definitions of terrorism that make it possible for them to impose their agenda and make some decisions that go against freedom and that make it possible for them to act politically to overcome challenges facing them. We know that there is an accepted definition, which is a threat or the perpetration of severe acts of violence that forces Canadian.
Minute mark, if I could ask that you conclude your remarks in the next 20 seconds or so.
Tout ce que je voulais dire, c'est que.
So all I wanted to say is that the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is the repressive arm of the Iranian state, which is one of the most odious dictatorships on the planet. However, given the climate of near conflagration in the Middle East, and given the problems that unfortunately exist in the Middle East, I think that it is not a good idea to put the IRGC on the list of terrorists.
We now turn to Professor Holdi. You also have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, honourable members of the committee, I would like to thank the committee for this opportunity and for your hard work on this critical matter over the past 2 years. For your purview, I've enclosed in my submission notes several of my written analytical pieces on Iran International English that discuss the activities of the IRGC. My submission today is divided into historical background, recent developments, and summation. From the 1960s onwards, Shia fanatical Iranian urban guerrillas plotted and staged several successful terror attacks against the Iranian imperial state officials. These guerrillas received training in urban warfare and assassination from armed Palestinian organizations with the financial backing of Nasser's Egypt, the Ba'athist regimes of Iraq and Syria, and Gaddafi of Libya. They also worked with security services of several Soviet bloc states, including Communist East Germany and Maoist China. Most importantly, this network trafficked arms and hard currency and collaborated with armed insurgents from Southeast Asia to the Irish Republican Army in that period. After the fall of the Pahlavi dynasty in 1979, the very members of these guerrillas founded the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. In the interests of time, I will be skipping some of my paragraphs here. I studied law in Iran, and I would be grateful to bring to your attention that per Article 150 of the Islamic Republic of Iran's constitution, the IRGC is officially enshrined. It is not accountable before anyone but the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic, and it is unimpeachable by the ostensibly elected Parliament of the Islamic Republic. In the 80s, the IRGC was integral in the brutal suppression of Iranian political dissidents, and it actually staged several coup attempts against Persian Gulf Arab monarchies in that region. The opportunity for it to create the first Iranian armed proxy, and perhaps the foremost ones, was the Hezbollah of Lebanon in the aftermath of the Israeli occupation of Lebanon in the same period. Per recent developments, since the 1990s, the IRGC has been a major force in Iran's post-war economy and has evolved into a large construction racket whose Khatam al-Anbiya headquarters and its consulting engineering companies were assigned multi-billion-dollar dam, petrochemical, and transportation projects. IRGC's Special Quds Force has been instrumental in the military-caliber brutal suppression of the Iranian people's recurring uprisings over the past 15 years, chiefly the suppression of the autumn 2022 Woman Life Freedom uprising. Since 2015, the IRGC has built up a criminal network in collaboration with Mexican and South American drug cartels and has been very active in the dark web, cryptocurrency transactions, and other international money laundering operations that use various front enterprises from the Gulf region and Southeast Asia to Latin America, US, and here, Canada. Since 2022, IRGC's military-industrial complex has supplied the Russian war machine with tens of thousands of technologically sophisticated and some not so sophisticated projectiles of various types. I will, again, skip some of my paragraphs here. The IRGC has been instrumental in creating the present state of instability in the Middle East by creating the Houthis of Yemen, a la Hezbollah framework, and I cannot adequately underscore the involvement of the IRGC in international criminal activity and the threat it poses to all Canadians, especially Iranian Canadians. I cannot also sufficiently emphasize the involvement of the IRGC, directly or indirectly, in recruiting the Hezbollah of Lebanon, Canadian Hells Angels, and other transnational gangster networks to plot attacks against Jewish religious and cultural centers, as well as Iranian dissidents across the world. I must add here, as a note, that the IRGC is also implicated in crimes against humanity against 500,000 civilian Syrians, basically massacring them, and the displacement of about 2 million Syrians in conjunction and confederation with the Hezbollah during the civil war in defense of the Ba'athist regime of Bashar al-Assad. It has been claimed, and this is my last paragraph, that listing IRGC as a terrorist entity is fraught with various legal and political problems. Even Joseph Borrell, the outgoing EU foreign policy chief, has stated as much, that without judicially vetted evidence, one cannot risk listing IRGC as a terrorist organization. I beg to differ. I'm almost there, sir. Historical evidence, contemporary as well as several occurrences of terrorist activities dating back over the past 30 years, as established by European courts, confirm that IRGC is a sponsor of terrorism in the West, and it's a threat toward peace and Canada's security, as well as our transatlantic alliance. Thank you very much for this opportunity again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kholdi. We next go to Mr. Taleblu, who's joining us virtually. Welcome, Mr. Taleblu. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Chairman, Vice Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to testify virtually before you today and to share my analysis. My comments today begin broad, then zoom in, and come at a particularly turbulent time in Iran that may be hard to understand for external observers and non-Iran watchers. Recently, the country's President Ibrahim Raisi died in a helicopter crash in northwestern Iran. Despite Iranian drones now being found in conflict zones in at least 4 continents, it was reportedly a Turkish drone that found the crash site first. Elsewhere, in normal countries, an accident of this scale would elicit national mourning and popular sorrow. Yet in Iran and across Persian-language social media, news of the president's passing were treated with felicitation, jubilation, and even jokes by large swaths of society. Indeed, there is nothing normal about the massive chasm that exists today between state and society in Iran. That's because the Islamic Republic of Iran is an Islamist and authoritarian regime that sits atop and represses a secular, nationalist, and democracy-seeking people. while snap elections, quote unquote, or more aptly put, selections, are scheduled for later this June. Those are expected to be boycotted en masse, just as parliamentary elections were a few months ago. Since the outbreak of nationwide anti-regime protests from 2017 and on, rising protests has meant record low-setting turnouts, even when looking at official regime statistics. Indeed, for a regime with as little social legitimacy as the Islamic Republic, exogenous shocks like snap elections or accidents involving major political figures can ill be afforded, given that the Iranian population has used nearly every opportunity, including crises, be they social, economic, environmental, or even related to foreign policy, as opportunities to protest and to make their case that the state does not represent the street and that they are done with incremental reform and seek wholesale political change. This desire for a wholesale political change caught the eyes and ears of members of this distinguished body from 2022 to 2023, when during the height of the Women Life Freedom, or Zan Zindagi Azadi movement, anti-regime protests rocked over 150 different cities, towns, and villages across all of Iran's 30 provinces at its peak. One of the elements in the cocktail of security forces instrumental in repressing those protests was the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC is a parallel ideological military created in the early days of the Islamic Revolution as a check against the national military. Tasked with defending the integrity of, quote, the revolution, this force and its veterans, affiliates, and supporters now constitutes the single most important institution in contemporary Iran. It is the tip of the spear of the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism today, and the hub in its spoke of transnational terrorism and repression. For almost 2 decades now, the dominant trend in the discourse among regime elites in Iran who support the IRGC has been to frame its network abroad as an anti-status quo, quote, axis of resistance, constituting proxies and partners around the Middle East that were either created, like the Badr Corps in Iraq or Hezbollah in Lebanon, or co-opted, like the Houthis in Yemen or Hamas in Gaza. Nonetheless, the IRGC trains, equips, supports, and underwrites these terror militias in its axis with state-level capabilities, as has been the case with the Houthis in Yemen since 2015. This group, which was the latest to join the axis of resistance, is now in possession of medium-range ballistic missiles and anti-ship ballistic missiles. To date, it is the only proxy of Iran to have paraded and used these capabilities. Elsewhere, it helps to work with those proxies to indigenously produce weapons, as has been the case with Iran and Hamas since 2014. Since the Iran-backed terrorist attack against Israel by Hamas on October 7, the IRGC has bringing more of its terrorist apparatus online, employing a ring-of-fire strategy so as to escalate the Gaza war into a regional conflict and prevent a member from its axis from being militarily taken off the chessboard. While these proxies in the region have been traditionally used by the IRGC to mask its hand in foreign conflicts, today they are calling cards or tells of the regime's regional enmeshment and growing capabilities and risk tolerance. While the IRGC has helped Tehran engage in internal suppression and external aggression, its increasing role offers the distinguished members of this body, North American policymakers, and in reality all Five Eyes nations, the opportunity to course-correct their Iran policies. In my view, every single Five Eyes country ought to be prescribing the IRGC under their own national counter-terrorist authorities as a terrorist organization in its entirety. I'd be happy to explain why and the benefits of this approach in the Q&A. Every single Five Eyes countries also ought to be using this time to push for anti-corruption or Magnitsky-style penalties against the supreme leader of Iran and his inner circle, as well as taking the opportunity to align other sovereign sanctions regimes, be they nuclear, missile, drone, Russia, or human rights related. After all, the IRGC is proliferating drones to Russia for use in Ukraine, escalating Iran's nuclear program, engaging in more overt ballistic missile activity to include strikes, attacks in 4 nations during the first 4 months of 2024 alone, and stepping up its internal crackdown against dissidents inside the country. The predicate for more multilateral action today exists. The main
Blue, if I could ask you to wrap it up in the next 10, 15 seconds, please.
Sure. The main question is, does the West have the commensurate resolve to act to contest these threats and better marry its head and its heart on Iran policy? Thank you for the time and the opportunity.
Thank you very much for that. So looking at the clock and the commitments that the members have, each round will be 4 minutes, and we will start off with MP Abultaif. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the witness. Welcome to committee. I'll start with Professor Koldi. we know that the network of the IRGC in Canada is quite big, is branched in different shapes, from money laundries to smuggling to weapons to drugs to everything. And we know that to feed back the regime with cash, illegal cash. This illegal operation has been going for years in Canada. Is calling or recognizing IRGC as a terrorist organization is the first serious step to start fighting their existence in Canada? Yes or no?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Any idea on the size of the money laundry and the network, how many people they could have on Canadian soil? We know that in the Middle East they've done with Yemen, with Lebanon, with Syria, in Iraq. They're everywhere. And I'm afraid we have this. They have the same model in Canada and maybe, of course, in other nations. How much of information we have on this organization in Canada and their activities?
In the interest of time, sir, I should say that we do not. Whatever information that we have is never enough, because they have shown from the time that everything was analog in the 60s and 70s to the 80s that everybody was using facsimiles and 90s to today, to present day, they've been adapting themselves. So what we need is a sustainable effort in tracking to these adaptation measures. And we should not forget that these Revolutionary Guard commanders, especially the ones who started from Lebanon, they have second, third wives there. They have families there. You cannot sometimes tell who is really Lebanese, who is really Iranian. They have done the same thing in Syria as well. What is imperative is that the respective commission in British Columbia that was assigned by the government of British Columbia reported that the Hezbollah of Lebanon has been working with the El Chapo cartel to launder money in British Columbia. Hezbollah doesn't do anything without coordination, prior coordination with the Revolutionary Guards. If they are here, not only are they active through the diaspora community and some of the relatives that they have here, but also they are doing business through the Latin American cartel as well.
It's time for diplomacy. Dr. Talibou or Mr. Talibou, it's time for diplomacy is over, and we need to get serious about fighting because IRGC are ideological. They're not going to stop at any point. They continue to do what they do. They have a lot of patience and they have a lot of power. Isn't the time to start fighting that seriously in Canada?
Yes, sir, I'd wholeheartedly agree with that statement. Thank you for the honorary promotion to doctor, but alas, I don't have a PhD. In essence, yes, if Canada is not going to use legal authorities like a prescription, political authorities like a prescription to begin to contest the illicit presence of this global terrorist organization on its own soil, then it really leaves a huge capabilities gap and renders one and pushes one into a worse footing to deal with transnational repression, terrorism, drug smuggling, arms proliferation, and everything else that Canadian officials have been concerned about.
Do we have enough information? Okay, final question also to you, Mr. Talibou. Do we have enough information, you believe, in Canada about this organization and the depth of the network of it in Canada?
We certainly have enough information to make a public call for the prescription, and I say that as an American who also has an interest in having a more unified North American policy towards this group. But we need more information on the breadth and the depth of its other illicit activities that haven't made itself known in the good news and articles such as Shahram Koldi's reporting has revealed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We next go to MP Oliphant. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I'll begin just by echoing or paraphrasing Professor Rabouti's opening comments with respect to there is no tolerance and, in fact, disgust for both the actions of the regime as well as the IRGC. And so I think that we are united on that. We may be looking at differences in the way we approach that, but I think we are united in the condemnation of the regime.
About that, there's no doubt about that.
Professor Koldi, Could you describe the either organizational or political or differences which could exist between the regime and IRGC? Is there any daylight between the two?
Absolutely not, sir.
Okay. At the end of your testimony, you said that the IRGC was indeed a supporter of terrorism, a state supporter of terrorism.
As they so brag themselves about it in their public interviews.
That's right.
As the commanders, I can bring for you a litany of evidence that is available in the official agencies of the IRGC.
So there's no daylight between the IRGC and the regime. Canada in 2012, under the previous regime, listed the Iranian Republic, as a state supporter of terrorism. And that's been reaffirmed every 2 years at the biennial review every year. So we have, in fact, decreed, it is a state sponsor, and we've decreed that the Quds Group is a terrorist organization. And we have put in sanctions limiting, as well as immigration measures limiting. I want to go to Professor Rabudi, though, and say, while you have expressed your disdain and condemnation of the IRGC, you're talking about timing or the appropriateness of listing them as a terrorist organization. How many countries in the world have listed, among our allies, NATO allies, European allies, have listed the IRGC as a state, as a terrorist organization?
Exactly the countries that you cited, there is not, especially in the Middle East, there is hesitation. And in the Middle East, as you know, even on the Sunni, space, there is a division. The regime are saying something, the population are another thing. And as I told you, what I want you to understand, it's not the fact that I'm denying what all my colleagues have said. Everything who was said is true. The problem is the timing and what is happening now in the Middle East and the way the Muslim world is perceiving now Canada. When I said what I said, I was talking about the political incidence that such this decision taken now could have in the Muslims world. It will associate us as a country to what is happening. That it will facilitate the propaganda and the propaganda of the regime, and they are very gifted, gifted in terms
our
of
Parliament has been clear that we view the IRGC as a terrorist organization. The Parliament, European Parliament, has said the same.
Yeah.
However, the move to list them as a terrorist organization has other complications, I understand. I've looked at them domestically and the impact on some Iranian Canadians' lives. You're also bringing up the geopolitical impact of doing that. And would it be best to do that in concert with allies, or how would we do that? This is not a new problem. This has gone on for 30 years. We've had previous governments that have had to deal with this sensitively to try to figure out the best way to protect Canadians of Iranian background, to send a message to Iran, and to defeat their external activities, Hezbollah.
Sorry, I was just...
Well, if you could respond in writing to us at some point, I think it would be very... In fact, if any of the witnesses could respond in writing to that particular question of the sensitivities that we have as MPs that want to state a strong position on the IRGC, by looking at the possible problems of doing that and when is the best time to do it. That might be helpful for us.
Thank you.
We have
I'm afraid we would be grateful if you actually did send us your comments and your response to MP Oliphant's question, because we have very limited time. Mr. Bergeron, we turn to you. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos témoins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. I would like to continue asking you questions, Mr. Rabudi. My question is very simple. Do you think that the list of terrorist organizations is relevant? Politically, it is. Yes. Politically, yes. For sure. For the moment, listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization, even if it's justifiable or legitimate, is not, according to me, a good idea. Will it prevent them from doing what they're doing now? I don't know. I don't have the legal expertise to be able to say whether that would happen. But we can use all of the possible available mechanisms without necessarily making a political decision that has an ideological, political, geostrategic, and geopolitical effect in the Middle East that would harm Canada's image and that would just let the IRGC continue to do what it's doing because there is no intermediary there. Canada does have a reputation in the Middle East. It is recognized as a country that is not too Islamophobic, if you will, compared to other countries like France and the United States. So when making this kind of decision in these kinds of circumstances, one, it'll destroy that reputation, and secondly, in all areas in the Muslim world, be it Sunni or Shiite, Canada will be unfortunately be associated with the mass massacre in Gaza. And the losses are far more significant than whatever we could gain. So yes, the IRGC is responsible for killing people, but we can't make that kind of decision now. So we recognize it, and you say it in paragraph C of page 2, that they have likely committed morally and politically terrible acts. But really, we mustn't make a decision that would go against our political interests. But why? Well, this is what I'd like to understand. So why a terrorist group, condemning a terrorist group, and we're talking about an identity group or a cultural group, why could it discredit us to point the finger at a terrorist group in the Middle East? Answer. So what exactly are you saying? Would you, and I'm going to follow the logic to its end, so in parallel, a bit like the ICC is saying, if we were to declare the state of Israel as a terrorist state, well, yes, if you follow the logic that way, that's where we would end up. In the Middle East, there are a number of conflicts, and I put it in my brief. It's very difficult to absolve one party completely and to accuse the other of terrible things completely, because there are identity conflicts, but that are compounded by many other issues. But there are other actors involved in those conflicts that are practicing terrorists. There are non-state actors, but there are also state actors that are also practicing terrorism or committing terrorist acts. So what about Iran's actions in Syria? Iran is there, Turkey, Qatar. Why don't we declare all of those people as belonging on a list of terrorists? And then there's Israel as well that could be included in the Middle East. So really, that is what is going to happen in Muslim public opinion. Canada will lose its reputation as a mediator in the region. It's certain.
We go to MP Zarrillo. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to thank my colleague, Heather McPherson. The NDP was the first person, and Heather herself, MP McPherson, proposed this study over a year ago. And I'm really pleased. We're glad to see it coming now to the table. Unfortunately, it should have been done more than a year ago, but here we are. And I want to bring it right back. To British Columbia and my riding in Port Moody, Coquitlam. I'm going to ask Mr. Caldy, because I have thousands of Iranian Canadians living in my riding, many afraid of the news when they wake up in the morning around what's happening with women, life, freedom, the fact that they do not feel like they're living free in Canada. They are under surveillance, both here and afraid sometimes to be able to go home or can't go home. They lose family members in Iran. They can't go home. They're living in fear. They're seeing senior members of the regime in Vancouver, around Vancouver. I really want to talk about how could listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization help to let Iranian Canadians live freely in this country.
I thank the honourable member for the question. My question, whenever anybody invokes selectivism, is that if the Italian police were not able, over the past 60 years, to fight the mafia, did it stop the prosecutors of Milan who were assassinated by this mafia from fighting the mafia? If there are certain countries that are not respecting and are our allies and we cannot stand up to them, like Turkey, does it justify that we don't act against other countries? And then it would be a free-for-all? This is fascinating, this kind of relativism. It is, in fact, a fallacy, and I absolutely dispute and contest such a fallacy, not just as a matter of moral principle, but as a matter of practicality. Are we waiting for someone in Port Coquitlam to be assassinated by the agents of the IRGC? Or myself, that I have received every now and again all sorts of threats from the goons of the Islamic Republic, not only in this country, but when I was teaching at the University of Manchester, and I did my PhD there. Are we waiting until then? Ma'am, I believe it is time to act, and it is to act with all the resources that we have. At least we would say that we tried to act and failed, and not that we did not try to act and we failed.
Thank you, Mr. Goldie. My last minute or two, I'm going to ask Mr. Raboudi. Mr. Raboudi, you are also a professor, and I know that there are a number of professors that worked in universities in Iran that were not conscripted, but still had their card from the SEPA so that they could have passports. And I know that this causes an issue for them, and I know many of them have come together in Canada to talk about their situation. So I wonder if you could share some insight about how listing the IRGC could both help Canadians live free here in Canada and also protect those professional university professors that didn't serve.
It's a very good question, but it is also very difficult to give an answer to such a question. I think another time I am back. I'm absolutely not discussing all the fact that my colleagues has offered and or has explained, but I don't think declaring them as, for the moment, declaring them as a terrorist organization, if they are, there is no doubt that they are practicing terrorism. There is no doubt, but it will change absolutely nothing for those who are inside Iran, and probably the regime is going to use that to justify what he's doing. He's going to legitimate what he's doing.
Will it change anything for Canadians? Sorry to cut you off.
Considerably over time.
Will it change something for?
I'm afraid we're 50 seconds over time, so I'm sorry, but we're going to have to conclude this session. At this point, allow me to thank Professor Raboudi, Mr. Taliblu, and Dr. Holdi. Thank you very, very much. Given the limited time that was available for questioning, if there's anything that any of you do like to follow up on, to elaborate on, please don't hesitate to send us submissions. The clerk will very graciously receive them for the benefit of the members. Thank you very much. This meeting stands adjourned.